Coming up on Arirang News, South Korea announces reforms to its compulsory military service to allow fewer exemptions so it can deal with an expected shortage of manpower. The National Security Council takes a final look at Seoul's military intel sharing pact with Japan before President Moon decides whether to let it expire this Saturday. And with South Korea hosting summits next week with almost a dozen leaders from Southeast Asian countries, we take a look at the economic potential of the Mekong region. It's 4 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. The Blue House convened a National Security Council meeting this morning to discuss the fate of GSOMIA, South Korea's military information sharing pact with Japan. The results of the meeting are yet to be announced. But coming ahead of GSOMIA's termination this Saturday, NSC members are expected to have organized their final thoughts on the issue. After he's briefed on the details of today's meeting, President Moon is likely to offer his own final thoughts on it before making a final decision. The president made Seoul's stance clear during his televised town hall meeting on Tuesday, when he said it's difficult to cooperate with Japan on military matters when Tokyo keeps expressing distrust towards South Korea over security. He said the decision cannot change without Japan lifting its export restrictions, but he added his government is willing until the very end to try and find an alternative. Seoul's Unification Minister, currently on a visit to Washington, says he has explained to the U.S. Special Envoy to North Korea, Stephen Biegun, the significance of tourism at the North's Mount Geumgang, as the regime threatens to tear down South Korean facilities there. Speaking to reporters on Wednesday, Kim Yeon-chul said he got the impression in his talks with Biegun that Washington is prepared to discuss contentious points with Pyongyang and that it shares the view that America's ties with the North should move in a virtuous cycle with inter-Korean ties. In a seminar earlier in the day, Kim said he hopes the tensions over the Mount Geumgang resort will eventually lead to sustainable cooperation, and that in this changed environment, Seoul will actively seek to resume the tours. One of North Korea's top diplomats, who's currently in Russia, is saying that Pyongyang has no interest in meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump unless Washington ends what the regime calls its hostile policy. Lee Seung-jae reports.
North Korea's Vice Foreign Minister Choi Sun-hee spoke to reporters Wednesday after meeting Russian officials in Moscow. She said it would be impossible to hold another summit between the leaders of North Korea and the United States if President Trump maintains his current stance towards the North. According to Seoul-based Yonhap News Agency, Che called on the U.S. to withdraw all of its hostile policy against the regime if it wishes to continue negotiations and discuss nuclear issues again. While Che nor any other North Korean official has specified what constitutes hostile policy, Pyongyang's foreign ministry has labeled a recent UN resolution on its human rights abuses as a U.S.-led political provocation. The regime has also called for an end to joint military drills with Seoul, as well as the lifting of economic sanctions. Meanwhile, speaking to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee on Wednesday, U.S. Special Representative on North Korea Stephen Biegun called on North Korea to seize the moment, saying the window is still open, and adding the North should not miss this opportunity. However, Biegun says there's a possibility Pyongyang could be going back to more provocative steps that preceded the start of the diplomacy between the two sides. While the U.S. envoy reiterated that the U.S. will try to resolve the North Korea issue for as long as it takes, Biegun says such a decision by Pyongyang would be a huge mistake. Despite the North's reminder of the year-end deadline, Biegun says the U.S. does not view it as such, calling it an artificial deadline set by the regime and a deadline they've set upon themselves. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The floor leaders of South Korea's three biggest political parties are in Washington, D.C. to discuss the defense cost-sharing issue. Upon his arrival, ruling Democratic Party floor leader Lee In-young said he will explain the stance of Korea's National Assembly to the U.S. Congress, which is that the cost should be shared fairly based on mutual respect and trust. Main opposition Liberty Korea Party floor leader Na Kyung-won pledged to explain the importance of keeping U.S. troops in South Korea. Bareunmirae Party floor leader Oh Shin-hwan added that they will also discuss with the U.S. Seoul's soon-to-be terminated intel sharing pact with Japan. In part 4 of our special series ahead of the ASEAN meetings in Busan next week, we take a closer look at the economic bloc formed around the Mekong River and its amazingly fast growth in recent years. Lee Min-sun reports.
The almost 5,000-kilometer-long Mekong River that runs through the Indochina Peninsula connects 5 ASEAN countries physically and economically. Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam are home to 243 million people, many of whom make a living from fishery and agriculture. The region is largely dependent on resources from the Mekong River. In 2018, those 5 Mekong countries produced over 111 million tons of rice, which accounts for over 15% of the world's total rice production.
Even if a large part of their economy is still agro-based economies, but nevertheless, some of the countries of Mekong region have shown a remarkable growth in the manufacturing sectors of their economy.
The total GDP for the 5 countries in the Mekong region amounts to $866 billion as of 2018. These regions are also drawing international investors' eyes with a strong economic growth outlook. According to the International Monetary Fund, as of 2018, the economic growth forecast for Cambodia and Vietnam was over 7%, with Laos and Myanmar also expected to grow by over 6%.
If you look at the average economic growth rate of the whole world, which is at 3%, and also if you look at the ASEAN, whose annual growth rate on average is 5%, this 7% might be called phenomenal.
In addition, the region's abundant natural resources and young labor force also make the Mekong region an attractive emerging market. Thailand's median average age is 38, Vietnam's is just 30, and the average age is even lower at 27 in Myanmar, Cambodia, and Laos. The region has huge development potential in hydropower, timber, mineral resources, and natural gas. The Mekong region also holds geopolitical importance as it borders both India and China, attracting large economic powers such as the US, Japan, and China to build and strengthen ties with the region in an effort to further promote their own Indo-Pacific strategies. Lee Min-sun, Arirang News.
South Korea's relationship with the Philippines goes back to the 1940s. In fact, it was the first of the ASEAN countries to give South Korea diplomatic recognition. Our Choi Jung-yoon looks at where the two countries stand in trade and how a new FTA could strengthen those economic ties.
Known for its picturesque beach resort of Boracay, the Philippines consists of more than 7,600 islands. Situated in the western Pacific Ocean, the islands are home to an estimated 105 million people, most of whom are Roman Catholics. Increasing urbanization, a growing middle class, and a fast-growing population of young workers, the country's economy ranks 5th in the ASEAN regional bloc and is the 38th largest in the world. The Philippines has seen an average annual economic growth rate of 6.2% since 2010 and has a per capita income of $3,100. It is considered a newly industrialized country, which has an economy in transition from one based on agriculture to one focusing more on services and manufacturing. However, many Filipinos end up in low-end service jobs with their average wages remaining stagnant. To improve conditions, the local government is expected to continue its expansionary fiscal policy, along with increasing international trade. South Korea is one of the major trading partners of the Philippines. Trade volume between the two reached $15.6 billion last year. Exports from the Philippines to Korea amounted around $3.5 billion last year, with grains, industrial electrical machinery, and copper goods topping the list of main exports. South Korea's exports to the Philippines last year were valued at $12 billion, with the main exports being semiconductors, petroleum products, and automobiles. Seoul and Manila are pushing to finalize a bilateral free trade agreement by the end of the year. and they are likely to discuss education, social security, and tourism during the upcoming Korea-ASEAN Commemorative Summit. If signed, the FTA with Korea will only be the Philippines' second bilateral trade deal, following the Philippines-Japan Economic Partnership Agreement, which came into force in 2008. 최정윤, Arirang News.
Also among the countries taking part in the Korea-ASEAN Commemorative Summit is Vietnam, one of South Korea's key economic partners. During President Moon's state visit to Hanoi last year, the two countries agreed to expand their economic cooperation to reach a trade volume of $100 billion by next year. Oh Jung-hee has more.
Located on the eastern tip of the Indochina Peninsula and home to an estimated 97 million people, Vietnam is widely seen as one of the most dynamic emerging countries in Asia. Thanks to the Doi Moi economic reform, the Vietnamese economy has grown by an average of 6.6% a year for the past 30 years, and its GDP hit $245 billion last year. The country's economy is the sixth largest in the ASEAN regional bloc and the 46th in the world. For South Korea, Vietnam makes an attractive partner. The trade volume between the two topped $68 billion last year, 130 times larger than it was when they established diplomatic ties in 1992. Seoul and Hanoi mostly trade semiconductors, flat panel displays and sensors, wireless communication devices, and clothing with each other. South Korea's President Moon Jae-in says Vietnam stands at the very center of its new southern policy and that the two countries will expand trade even further.
왕 대통령께서는 2020년까지 현대화된 산업국가를 건설하고자 한다고 말씀하셨습니다. 저는 양국의 긴밀한 상생 협력이 베트남의 산업화 목표와 2020년까지 교역액 1천억 불이라는 공동의 목표 달성에 크게 기여하리라는 점을 강조했습니다.
South Korea has become Vietnam's largest foreign investor and second biggest trading partner. Vietnam is also the largest focus for Seoul in development cooperation and one of the most popular tourist destinations for Koreans. Seoul and Hanoi are looking to boost cooperation in achieving fourth industrial revolution, fostering urban development, and allowing more Vietnamese workers into Korea. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, North Korea has made it official that it will not be sending any ranking official next week to the ASEAN summits. The regime's state-run news agency reported Thursday that despite the invitation sent earlier this month by the South Korean president to the regime's leader Kim Jong-un, North Korea sees no reason to attend. The South Korean presidential office has until now said it was ready for any possibility. It has not yet, however, made a public statement on the report from Pyongyang. Despite the expectations of fans, K-pop stars from boy bands like BTS will not be exempted from Korea's compulsory military service, according to the latest reforms laid out by the government. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
In a meeting presided over by Prime Minister Lee Na-kyun on Thursday, related ministries led by the Ministry of National Defense unveiled several revised measures on how to resolve the expected shortage of military manpower amid a shrinking population. Officials said the country will cut slots for alternative military service by around 1,300 from the current 7,500 slots, but it will allow doctoral and master's degree holders, those with specialized industrial skills, and sailors to work at state-designated institutes and companies instead of serving in the military. While the quota for experts enrolled in doctoral programs will remain unchanged at 1,000, experts with master degrees will be gradually reduced by 20% to 1,200. Instead, the number of people assigned to small and medium-sized enterprises is to be increased, a measure aimed at helping SMEs retain personnel. In such cases, companies engaged in industrial materials, components, and equipment will receive priority. The number of onboard ship reserve personnel who can alternatively work as merchant sailors to take part in the transport of critical materials in the event of war will be lowered to 800 from 1,000. Changes were minimal regarding those allowed alternative service for achievements in the arts and sports in which less than 45 people are eligible annually. But officials said it'll make the process more transparent to raise fairness. Despite expectations of a possible revision to include exemptions for K-pop stars like BTS, those cases were not included in the recent revision. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
South Korea's income gap narrowed slightly in the third quarter, mostly due to increased government support for the lowest income households. According to Statistics Korea on Thursday, households in the bottom 20% income bracket earned an average of $1,168 a month from July to September, up more than 4% on year. Over the same period, the top 20% earned some $8,335 a month, up 0.7% on year. The agency said the income of the bottom 20% rose in large part because of more government spending on things such as public pensions. It also said the country's job market has started to recover slightly. Japan's exports to South Korea dropped sharply last month amid escalating tensions between the two countries. Tokyo's finance ministry says Japan's shipments to South Korea in October were down some 23% on year to around $3.5 billion. Big declines were seen in particular in food, automobiles, and semiconductors. Exports have fallen due mainly to a South Korean boycott of Japanese goods stemming from Tokyo's trade restrictions and historical disputes. Japan saw its trade surplus with South Korea tumble last month by more than 41% on year. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, Global Strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, thank you as always for making time.
Good afternoon.
Well, the U.S. Congress has almost unanimously passed a bill in support of the pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong, China demanding the U.S. stop interfering. So there's a concern this might jeopardize the trade deal. Tell us about that and how the markets are doing today.
Yes, as you said, the House passed the pro-Hong Kong rights bill on Wednesday, putting some pressure to the President Donald Trump in bind as he tries to roll out the high-stakes trade talk with China. The chamber approved measures that aims to protect human rights in Hong Kong by a 417-1 margin, obviously unanimously basically passing this bill. Clearly, this is putting pressures in terms of the conditions in the Asian market, as well as most of the global equity market, because the trade talk might be postponed till next year or even not happened because of this passing the bill. If you look at the U.S. market, it has declined by 0.4%. For Dow, S&P was down about 0.4% as well. Nasdaq was down 0.5%. Nikkei was also down 0.48%. Actually, Kospi was down a lot bigger by 1.35%. As for the China, it was down slightly by 0.25%.
Well, now this uncertainty about the trade deal, we see the Korean won starting to weaken again against the U.S. dollar. What's happening there, and what's your near-term outlook?
Sure. I have expected that one to depreciate a bit because it appreciated too fast from 12.23 to 11.51, appreciating by more than 5% plus in a very short span of time. But now it has gone up to 11.77 territories, so depreciated by around 2% or so from this bottom. The reason for that is because foreign investors continue to sell the Korean equity market because of the uncertainty related to the economic growth rate, as well as the uncertainty that the MSCI index changes resulting into net selling of Korean equity versus net buying of Chinese equities. We don't think that, though, this currency rate will go back up to 1,200 level because the Korean growth rate is probably likely to be next year 2% level. And because of that, stabilizing at around 1160 to 1190 range will be most likely case for the next 6 months or so. But continuation of concern about the economic condition lingers. We do need more aggressive supplementary budget, fiscal budget, as well as probably additional rate cuts.
Right. Well, we now have the minutes from the Fed's meeting in October. They're saying they're not really in a hurry to cut rates again. At this point, do you think they'll cut rates again next month?
I don't think that they will cut another rate. This was probably the last insurance rate cut. Historically, they've done that 3 times before. 75 basis point cut as an insurance cut. And this time around, they have cut it by 75 basis point in this last 3 months or so. Clearly, the economic condition is very important for further rate cuts. We think that if some kinds of deals are made between China and U.S. in terms of trade talk, we do think the U.S.'s intrinsic growth rate can be above 1.5, maybe well above 2% level. So because of that, with the current policies, we do think that U.S. economy will grow similar level of the growth rate as they've done this year. So having said that, I don't think that they will be cutting additional rates, but if the trade deal doesn't go through and tariffs are increased, then yes, we do think that the rate cut is probably necessary.
Got it. All right, Mr. Yu, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate your insights.
Thank you very much.
U.S. media sources suggest the partial trade deal between the U.S. and China could be delayed until next year. Citing trade experts and White House officials, Reuters says the Trump administration faces more demands from China in the form of extensive tariff rollbacks. Trump said at a cabinet meeting Tuesday that any deal with China will have to be one that he likes, and he threatened to raise tariffs even higher if the deal collapses. The American president added he's happy for now and in no rush. Almost half a year since the company was blacklisted, some suppliers of Huawei are starting to get approval from the U.S. government to start selling to the firm again. The U.S. Commerce Department announced on Wednesday that it started issuing licenses to some companies. They've been getting notices of approval and intent to deny. It wasn't immediately known which products have been approved, but the partial lifting of sanctions has eased concerns among American companies who made billions of dollars in sales to Huawei last year. New research suggests China is responsible for around a third of the ultrafine dust pollution that sometimes flows into South Korea, and up to 70% of it when concentrations are particularly high. Lee Kyung-eun reports.
32% of Korea's ultrafine dust originates from China, while 50% is generated domestically. This is according to a joint study by Korea, China, and Japan, which analyzed the source and amount of pollutants smaller than 2.5 micrometers or ultrafine particles in the 3 countries between 2013 and 2017. The study is part of a broader project known as Long-Range Transboundary Air Pollutants in Northeast Asia, which was launched in 1996 to improve regional air quality. The research breaks down the origins of the 3 countries' annual average concentration of ultrafine dust into 2 factors, internal and external. Korea, China, and Japan were responsible for 51%, 91%, and 55% respectively for their own pollution. China was also a major external contributor of pollutants among the 3 countries. China generates 32% of Korea's ultrafine dust and 25% of Japan's. In a sharp contrast, Korea's impact on these neighboring countries was notably low, contributing with only 2% to China's pollution and 8% over in Japan. Beijing's contribution becomes even greater between December and March. The publisher of the study, Korea's National Institute of Environmental Research, had previously said that China attributes a staggering 70 to 80% of Korea's ultrafine dust pollution during those months. The joint research also showed improving figures. The annual concentration of pollutants between 2015 and 2018 declined in all 3 countries, with Korea by 12% and China by 22%. Another takeaway from the research is that China now officially admits its contribution to regional air pollution. However, experts say there is still more to do regarding air quality, such as further slashing exhaust gas emissions both domestically and across the region. Lee Kyung-eun, Arirang News.
And South Korea is planning to reduce the operation of its coal-fired power plants as much as possible this winter. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy, Sung Yun-mo, announced Thursday that operations will be cut by up to 20% and that thorough preparations will be made to ensure that power supplies are not disrupted. This is part of special measures announced earlier this month to reduce fine dust pollution, and it'll be the first time South Korea's cut coal power plant operation in winter. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.